Coups, plots and party machinations. We had 8 years of it with the Conservative Party. Now it looks like Labour might be going down the same road. We've seen a week of infighting within the government's ranks, and the position of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister looks weaker than ever. The last time Labour took down a Prime Minister whilst he was in power was Tony Blair, the most electorally successful Labour leader ever. So if it can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. So this week felt like the right time to look in more detail at that coup against Tony Blair and see if there are any lessons that Labour leader Keir Starmer can learn for the present. Welcome to History Counts. If you like political history that explains the modern day, do subscribe. I make a new video every week. To understand how Tony Blair was removed as Prime Minister, we have to understand how he came to power in the first place. We'll begin that story in 1994, when Labour were in opposition. Their leader, John Smith, died suddenly of a heart attack. The two candidates that were favourite to replace him were Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. We won't go into all the detail about what happened, but suffice to say, they eventually came to a deal in a restaurant in Islington. The agreement was that Tony Blair would become leader of the party and hopefully Prime Minister, but that Gordon Brown would eventually succeed him. Tony Blair and Gordon Brown together ushered in a new era in Labour's history. They called themselves New Labour, and in 1997 and again in 2001 they won astonishing landslide election victories. For the first 6 years of his time as Prime Minister, Tony Blair looked unassailable in his position. But behind the scenes there were always tensions between Tony Blair's number 10 and the Chancellor Gordon Brown's number 11. They became known as the TBGBs. As the years went on, Gordon Brown was putting more and more pressure on Tony Blair to fulfil his end of the bargain. Then in 2003, alongside the Americans, Labour took Britain to war in Iraq against the wishes of large swathes of the British public and also, very importantly, many of Labour's own MPs. For the first time, Tony Blair's position began to look vulnerable. In 2005, against a hugely ineffective Conservative Party, Labour won another election victory, but with a much reduced majority. In the year following that election victory, more and more Labour MPs became more and more open in their criticism of Tony Blair, and many of them began to call, publicly and privately, for him to name a date for the handover of power. On the 6th of September 2006, a group of junior Labour ministers, led by Tom Watson, detonated a bomb under the leadership of Tony Blair, resigning and calling for a renewal of the leadership. Gordon Brown denied any involvement in the plot, but for Westminster watchers, it was clear that those who'd resigned were Gordon Brown's allies and were agitating in favour of him. Blair responded by doubling down, telling the media that he was in it for the long run. That proved a catastrophic miscalculation. Within 48 hours, his position had totally collapsed, and he came out and told the media that he would resign within 12 months. With Tony Blair now effectively a lame duck Prime Minister, Gordon Brown began to tighten his control on the machinery of government. Key important decisions started to be deferred until Brown's expected coronation, and Tony Blair's control and authority over the Labour Party began to vanish. In May 2007, without any options left open to him, Tony Blair formally announced his resignation. A month later, Gordon Brown took over as Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party. The revolution that removed Britain's most electorally successful Prime Minister of the modern era was slow burning, but incredibly effective. For Keir Starmer, there are stark lessons. Party leaders generally only have authority over their MPs as long as those MPs believe that that leader will bring them electoral success in the future. But once that confidence goes, MPs become almost uncontrollable, and once authority is lost, it's almost impossible to get it back, especially if MPs are able to coalesce around an obvious successor. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I'll be back next week with a new video looking at the history behind the headlines.